Hi guys, for those of you who are new to my channel, my name is Jennifer, and today I'm going to review two books that I recently hauled, Ninefold to Make a Paper Swan by Ruth Gilligan and The Clay Girl by Heather Tucker. I loved both of these, gave them 4 stars on Goodreads, and it's funny because in my head now they're such a pair, like they're about the same length, they're the same height, and they're both made of really high quality paper, which means they're heavy, and that's appropriate because brace yourselves for the predictable. They're about really heavy topics, okay? There are plenty of light moments, but there's a constant underlying gravity to both of them, especially this one. I'll get into why they're not 5-star books later, but for now, it'd be helpful for you to know what they're about. Ninefold to Make a Paper Swan is about Jewish communities in Ireland, and we follow 3 main protagonists, Ruth, Shem, and Aisling. So we start with Ruth and her family in 1901. They're Lithuanian Jews, which is an extra little check for me because I'm part Lithuanian. Anyway, they decide to emigrate to New York, but their boat makes a detour and accidentally drops them off in Cork, Ireland, and they stay there. Then there's Shem, who's a boy who became mute 5 years ago, and his family doesn't know what to do with him, so they send him to an asylum. And his family is Irish Jews, and his mother converted to Judaism. And then Aisling is Irish, and her Jewish boyfriend asks her to convert for him. The chapters consistently rotate in that order, and Gilligan does a really interesting thing with time, because the 3 protagonists have an equal number of pages, but Ruth's chapters jump by decades, Shem's by months, and Aisling's by days. So technically we spend around 50 years with Ruth and 5 days with Aisling, but they have an equal share of the text. And all 3 stories end up interweaving in unexpected ways. The crafting of this book is a thing of beauty, and I'll talk about this more later, but the way that images and themes repeatedly crop up in tiny ways throughout all 3 stories is so satisfying. Some of these repeated ideas are about the bending of the self and how some people are forced to contort their identities to fit into their families and into their societies, and how vulnerable you are when you adapt yourself to please others. So Ruth moves to Ireland when she's 8. She loves Ireland and she wants it to be her home, but it's made clear to her again and again that no matter what she does, she'll never be considered Irish. And once you've folded yourself, even if you try to unfold that and go back to the way you thought of yourself before, there'll always be a crease, there'll always be a mark to show that you did that. All 3 characters feel adrift, but there's never a safe place to drop their anchors. And those feelings of having multiple selves and scrabbling for security and being painfully humbled and excluded are common to immigrants generally. But then Gilligan takes this a step further and commits to making these truly Jewish stories. So throughout this book, you can feel the weight of the Jewish diaspora and that specific history of tradition and persecution. The Clay Girl has a totally different structure. It follows one main protagonist, a Canadian girl named Ari, starting when she's 8 and following her until she's 16. She's the youngest of 6 sisters, and her family is all kinds of messed up. Her father's an abusive rapist, and her mother's an insecure, spiteful drunk. And at the beginning of the book, her father kills himself, and so all 6 sisters are separated and sent to live with different people, and Ari goes to live with her aunt, and it's the first time that she experiences security. And this book is about how that early period of love and safety, along with the other experiences of terror and abuse, form Ari as a person. At her aunt's, she learns how to sculpt pottery, and she often thinks about people as clay, about how malleable they are when they're young, and the hands that shape them. So this is a story about people evolving for better or worse, and about building families in surprising places, and learning to trust people even when it's been proven time and again that humans are the world's most disappointing species. Ari is one of the most charming first-person narrators I've read in a long time. She's poetic and snarky and an eternal optimist. I loved her voice. I drew so many smiley faces next to passages in here because that's how they made me feel. Something that both of these books have in common is beautiful language. They're not plot-driven, but if you're a reader who enjoys elegant writing or wordplay, these are for you. For me, that's the main strength of the Gilligan, the way that the meanings of words are constantly challenged and reframed across the stories, and she often uses phrases with double meanings. So in one of Ruth's chapters, thousands of birds drop dead out of the sky because they were accidentally sent off course, which obviously echoes Ruth and her family being sent off course to Ireland. And then in one of Shem's chapters, another character mentions a story about the beggar who can throw his voice to a couple of birds who have been blown apart so as to bring them back together. Now, being blown apart can mean like literally blown apart, their bodies like splat. Or it can just mean that the wind has separated them and they can be reunited, which again goes back to Ruth and her family because her immediate family is so fragmented, but she always wants them to come together more. And you get all that emotion in just one throwaway sentence. My favorite moment of wordplay comes from another one of Shem's chapters. We learned that earlier his mother had to explain to him the difference between stationary with an A, as in not moving, and stationary with an E, as in writing paper. And then at the end of the chapter, he gets to call his mother from the asylum for the first time, and he mentions that they're stationary on either end of the line. And he uses the correct one. He uses A, not moving. But because we had this moment before, as the reader, you also kind of imagine them as stationary with an E, as like blank pieces of paper waiting to be written on either end of the phone line. And throughout this book, I just felt like Gilligan really trusted the reader to keep up with the wordplay, and I love feeling respected like that. Like I said before, there are so many fleeting images that appear across the stories. There's paper, compasses, swans, rats, oranges, digging, ships. For the most part, Gilligan includes them so naturally. And when you stumble across one of these images, you instantly feel reconnected to the other two stories. And it's like Gilligan's creating this gorgeous tapestry for you. Speaking of gorgeous language, let's get back to the Clay Girl, because Ari has such an incredibly lyrical bend to her mind. And there's such lush language in here. And it almost never strays into being overwritten. And something really interesting that Tucker does is that Ari's language grows up with her. It noticeably changes throughout the book. So at the beginning, it's like a written version of Impressionist art, and sometimes it's actually hard to follow what's happening because Ari has such a whimsical take on the world. A lot of that Impressionist feeling gets gradually filtered out over the course of the book, but there are language tics that stay with her. So she often uses an unconventional word in an established phrase. At the beginning of the book, she talks about being on her mother's never-lasting nerve, and then later she says Frank spits on the sidewalk, then insists Jackie toward the waiting car instead of assists her toward the car. And just like with Nine Folds Make a Paper Swan, these are such little things that give the book a unique texture. There were so many sentences that I underlined because I just found the descriptions beautiful. So at one point, Ari takes a train ride at the end of summer and says, "Hours pass in silence. The honey-colored days behind me fade. Still, I feel their heat on my back. A few passing trees blush scarlet, and I know autumn's flame is ahead." So both of these books are incredibly rich and playful on the sentence-by-sentence level. I will say that Nine Folds Make a Paper Swan feels more removed than The Clay Girl. This is a little more on the distant side of clever, versus this one that is really intimate and feels like a cozy read, despite the subject matter. Now that I've done a fair bit of raving, it's time to put a damper on things, because both of these books had flaws, and I think that the biggest ones were built into their narrative structures. One possible problem with multiple narratives is that it's difficult to keep the interest level consistent. It's unlikely that readers will care equally about all three narratives. And I definitely didn't. I enjoyed Ruth's story so much more than the other two, and as much as I liked the connections and the wordplay that I've talked about, I honestly just wanted this to be 340 pages about Ruth. Now, part of that is my subjective personal preference, but I also think that Aislinn's chapters are significantly more heavy-handed than the others. There's just a slight lack of subtlety that's noticeable because of how well constructed the book is as a whole. In Ruth and Shem's chapters, it's like watching a tapestry weave itself, and in Aislinn's chapters, I could often like see Gilligan pulling the strings. At the other end of the spectrum, with one protagonist, there's the danger that readers will get tired of that character. Now, I never got tired of Arya herself. I loved her. But by the end of this book, I was up to here with the hero worship of her, okay? Oh my God. And, you think a kid from an abusive childhood, it's important for some characters to take her aside and tell her how worthwhile she is. And there were a few scenes like that made me tear up, because you do feel how formative these moments are for a vulnerable girl. Two things. One, these moments were almost never just somebody boosting her confidence. They were people telling her that she was the most wonderful, delightful, specialist thing anywhere ever. And two, It would have been fine if there had been 2 of these moments, 3 of them, but there were honestly like 17 throughout the book of all different characters pulling Arya aside and telling her that she was the most radiant thing in the whole galaxy. And I just got to the point where I was like, well, Jesus, like a drowned mongoose would develop confidence under these circumstances. If you changed the name Ari to Russia, this would be considered straight up propaganda. And I just got sick of it. Like, dear God, this is not life. I mean, all the truly repulsive characters were the ones who didn't like Ari, and all the good characters just worshipped her. And I'm sorry, but in life, like no matter how wonderful you are, there are going to be other wonderful people who don't like you. And I think that Ari is an amazing character, but I also think that Tucker fell in love with her own creation and didn't step back and give her any substantial flaws. So that by the end, Ari often felt like a mystical fairy instead of a raw human girl. But those complaints really are small compared to the awe and appreciation that I feel for both of these books. So if they've got your interest, I highly recommend them to you. Let me know if you've read them, what you think, or if you're planning on reading them, and I'll see you guys very soon. Bye. Thank you for watching.